This is what a security camera captured. Well, this in Lithuania. Border guards discovered a tunnel. Look, just look, there are people coming out of a hole. Watch how they start coming out from here. Look, there goes a person, right? And they go over there, and here comes another person. They're helping each other. Lithuanian border guards discovered another smuggling tunnel from Belarus. 38 illegal migrants from Afghanistan emerged from it. Lithuanian authorities have determined that the migrants who were not in immediate danger have already been returned to Belarus. This is already the third tunnel of this kind discovered recently. And well, it shows that there is this same strategy. Well, here are the people who were detained, right? While trying to cross, right? That's the hole, which is very roughly made. Very, very roughly made. I mean, this could collapse at any moment, honestly, but well, that's what they use. Look, this is a strategy that Belarus has had for a while. And well, Russia has used it too, by the way, at the time. But in the end, it has really bothered Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia. If we look at the map, right, to see this area of the world, here are the Baltic countries where Belarus is located. Well, it's in a very interesting area because it's a neighbor of Russia. It's a neighbor of Ukraine. But at the same time, it's also a neighbor of NATO and countries of the European Union. So in the end, it's really become a kind of pressure corridor from Russia to Europe through Belarus. How do they manage that? Well, look, they bring people from Africa and other places, and then they themselves, no, they don't accept them, but they do make it easy for them to cross into Europe, right? For what? To put pressure on, well, the European infrastructure, right? And they've been doing it for years, haven't they? That's not a short-term strategy. It's a very long-term strategy that tries to put pressure on Europe, put pressure on NATO with groups that, well, are just trying to survive, right? Who leave their countries because of certain emergencies they experience. But at the same time, well, Europe can't support them for now, right? I mean, it's not that easy for them to be able to support these people. And that has also become very complicated in the relationship between these countries, right? But hey, look at what's happening in Korea. But Korea is no longer just showing off weapons, but is now experimenting, apparently advancing in the types of weapons they're using according to what is known so far, right? A new projectile was launched. This projectile was accompanied by several systems that have been tested for the first time. The test comes after the summit between China and Russia, where they expressed their opposition to Western pressure against Kim Jong-un, basically. North Korea reportedly used today, Tuesday the 26th, a short-range ballistic missile accompanied by other projectiles. This is with the idea of demonstrating obviously their military strength, but also to experiment. The shot was in the city of Gyeongju and it traveled approximately 80 kilometers according to reports from South Korea's military high command. South Korea analyzes it, reviews it, and reports these kinds of situations, right? They have, well, 24-hour monitoring of what's happening on that side, right? And they try to report, well, how the situation is going. Where is Gyeongju? Let's look at this area. It's this place. It was launched from here. So let's see where it could have gone. Let's look at a distance of 80 kilometers. Let's calculate 80 kilometers. How much is that? No, let's see. Here we are at 140, 80 kilometers, 78. Well, more or less here. Let's see. There it is. Look, that's the line. Let's put the map. Here, farther south, obviously, is South Korea. That's more or less the route it can take. Of course, whether it went north or south. It's at a point where it doesn't affect either China, which is to the north, or South Korea. But it's a test that, however you look at it, is being watched. It wasn't an isolated launch, since multiple rocket launcher systems were also being tested. They suggest that this would be a kind of coordinated rehearsal. Military analysts say that the goal was to test the saturation and evasion capabilities against South Korea's defense systems. To begin with, the ability to detect this kind of movement. At the recent summit in Beijing, Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping also mentioned North Korea, stating that they reject any kind of sanctions or military pressure. That's the thing. That's the constant. I mean, North Korea's approach is to become the most defiant of them all. And for Russia and for China, in the end, it's like the most extreme point, right? I mean, you're supposed to be the one who balances things so they don't get out of control with countries that are highly hostile, right? Sure. Where they often launch missiles into the Sea of Japan, the East China Sea, the Yellow Sea that's next to South Korea. Also, and always trying not just to show strength, but to say, I'm aiming over there. In fact, there have been missiles that fly over Japan and land on the other side. It's like saying, I can reach over there too, right? So that's the role North Korea has had for some time now. And that's why whenever Putin and Xi Jinping meet, they always remember what North Korea means to them. Also, the border between the two Koreas is turning into a fortress. They claim it's impregnable. That's how Kim Jong-un has been using a very curious phrase lately. As if to say there's no way, or the idea is that there's no way anyone could cross it, right? Which also shows that it's a weakness, because lately there have been reports breaches where suddenly a group of North Koreans appeared walking on the South Korean side, apparently confused. Also, there have been these incidents where North Korean soldiers have escaped to South Korea. It's a situation that hadn't happened for a long time. It was already very controlled by the North Koreans. This situation, well, the problem has been coming back lately. And before we move on to anything else, I'd like us to take a look at the following. Look, let me see if we can put this on the screen, but here it is. Look, this is the reaction it has. Sorry, it's this one. There you go. That's it. This is Rubio's reaction to the conversation he had with Lavrov. Let's listen to what he says.
The news to all the embassies, and I think he was calling to say they informed all the embassies, but Kyiv's going to be a very dangerous place. Kyiv's been a very dangerous place now for a number of years. The message that Lavrov told him was from Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, and it was a message he wanted Marco Rubio to send directly to Trump, which
And Marco Rubio, the United States Secretary of State, says that he had a conversation with Lavrov, which we mentioned to you yesterday, but there weren't so many details. They say that Lavrov told him he had a message for Donald Trump. The message that Lavrov told him was from Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. And it was a message that he wanted Marco Rubio to send directly to Trump, which indicates the following. First, that there is a real risk for the embassies in Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, and that there is a real risk of escalation. To begin with, I think Lithuania's response is better, because Lithuania says, look, well, just don't attack, that's it. If there's a risk, it's your fault. The risk comes from your desire to shoot at the capital. And Lithuania says, well, don't shoot. It's very easy, very simple, right? And what does the United States do? He says, yes, sir. No, sir. At your command, basically, right? And the United States says, but yes, if they want to negotiate over Ukraine, we are here and we are ready to negotiate. I mean, the United States only wants to negotiate basically Russia's position or interest. And Ukraine, well, in this case, I imagine they must feel, well, betrayed, right? I mean, in the end, They're basically becoming Vladimir Putin's spokespeople. I mean, because it wasn't really necessary to say it like that to Marco Rubio, obviously, right? This is not a coincidence. This is an attempt at psychological terror, and Ukraine knows how this works. Even the United States could fall for this, which is why Marco Rubio responds that way. Ukraine already knows it. They already know all those tricks of sending a message as if they're going to launch a big attack. Maybe they do it, maybe they don't. But well, look, there it is. On one hand, there's the Russian narrative, and on the other hand, the Ukrainian narrative. And each one has their own points. But if we look at the facts about the effects of the Orezhnik weapon, well, yes, it has destructive power. But also, in response to this, people evacuate. They move. They don't just stay. And at the same time, it has been limited. In fact, about a quarter of the Orezhniks that are used end up failing. Tharus. One of the Orezhniks that were launched didn't even reach Ukraine. It exploded inside Russia. In this situation, according to what the SDSW says, the SISW, which is the War Institute, based on all the intelligence, satellites, and so on, the Russian intermediate-range ballistic missile called Orezhnik failed after its launch and crashed in the occupied Donetsk region. The incident occurred during one of the most intense attacks by Russia against Ukraine from May 23rd to 24th. Satellite images show how these missiles were released, and at least 6 submunitions were deployed. But they were released before impacting uncontrollably. What they claim is that the projectile fell on Russian positions near Avdiivka and Yakutsk-Bata. This has obviously increased the seriousness of the failure. According to the reports, the information is alarming. 1 out of every 4 Orezhnik missiles used by Russia fails. This type of missile is considered strategic and high cost, with an estimated value of $50 million per unit. But if a quarter of them are going to fail, and also cause you damage, well, that's not good. It's very shocking, because the explosion is very impressive in that sense. But the real effect, the day-to-day effect, is actually very limited. Russia. They also launched an operation with 600 drones, and those had more effect than the Orezhnik. Yes, I mean, they had more effect with, for example, the fires that happened. They also launched another 90 missiles, but the one everyone is talking about is the Orezhnik, which was the one that failed the most. But the drones and missiles, which caused the most problems, are barely mentioned. Wait, obviously there are questions here about what the role of the United States will be. In this conflict, if the role is basically going to be as a spokesperson for Russia, or if they are going to be working to truly end the war. What is the strategy? And to begin with, what will Europe's approach be? Because everything has a limit. And it seems that this limit is also about to be reached. I mean, if nothing is done, if an agreement isn't reached, they'll be pressured to make one. Well, Ukraine could also start making tough decisions or act in a more aggressive way. The possibility that this could also create more instability in the area. So Europe will also have to mediate and find a point where they can put pressure without ending up in a conflict that never ends. But anyway, that's how things look right now. Another issue as well, since we're talking about geopolitics and all that, there's already an update on what's happening with Iran. Very interesting. Check this out. Iran would be spreading an alleged message from Mojtaba Khamenei, while Khamenei, the current supreme leader, still hasn't appeared in public. He hasn't been seen, he hasn't been heard, not even a single photo. There are a lot of people who have uploaded photos of him, of how they imagine he would look, but in the end, we just don't know, right? Some say his face is injured, some say he's missing an arm or a leg. I mean, there are a lot of theories that will probably get confirmed at some point. But the Iranian leader still hasn't appeared in public. They say that not even the highest ranking officials are in contact with him. Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei stated today, Tuesday, in a message broadcast on Iranian television that the countries in the region will no longer be shields for United States bases. What is certain in that regard is that time will not go backward and that the nations and territories of the region will no longer serve as a shield. For the American bases, Khamenei himself reportedly said, right? Another interesting topic is Parliament. Look at what happened. Let's see, we told you yesterday. Hey, guess what? After 3 months, the internet returned to Iran. People are really happy. A lot of shocking things started to spread, right? The internet lasted 1 day. What do you think happened with President Masoud Pezeshkian's order in Iran? Well, it gets cancelled, right? And we're basically entering a phase of a coup d'etat inside Iran. Because in the end, the one who was voted for, which is Masoud Pezeshkian, because we didn't vote for them, right? People didn't vote for them, but Masoud Pezeshkian, who is the only leader and the president as well, right? Who was elected and declared, we must return the internet to the people. He pushed for this for 3 months. Finally, he gives the internet back to them. The next day, they stop him. And on top of that, they pressure him to stop doing what the president thinks is right. And instead just stick to what the supreme leader says. And that's it. So no, there is no President Masoud Pezeshkian. I mean, his role is almost just for show, right? And on top of that, he's under more and more pressure because in the end, the more radical people in Iran don't see him in a good light. How have you been? Thank you so much for joining us briefly. We're live, we're on the air. Thank you so much for being here. Well, now you're here with us for the news. Panterita, how have you been? Jesus Narro, very good morning. Darwin Blanco, how are things over there? Greetings also to Gas Duro. How's it going? How are you? Avery, greetings to Colombia. How are things there? What part of Colombia are you in, if you don't mind me asking? Oh, it's from Tuluá, Colombia. That's great. Says Jose. Well, Jose, how have you been? Your call. How are you? How have you been? Wishing you great health, Cynthia. Thank you very much. And to the whole community that keeps watching us live stream after live stream, I really appreciate your company. In a little while, we will analyze other topics. There are already some tensions. This is about the United States and Iran, right? There are some things we're still confirming, and if that's the case, well, we'll be discussing it in detail. But there's movement. There are problems, obviously. And anyway, it's not something excessive so far, right? I mean, not yet. We also have to be very clear about that, right? Look, here it's this image. There you go. Here it is. This is what I wanted to see. I mean, it stays above 100. Oh my God. It didn't keep falling like it seemed. The price of oil is starting to bounce back, but it's not an excessive increase either, right? I mean, we have to remember that it was at 100, almost 120, right? So despite the tensions, the attacks, and all that, this has been happening. Some oil tankers aren't the ones going to Japan, South Korea, or Europe, but rather they're oil tankers heading to China, Pakistan, or India. So far, that's what has been confirmed, right? It's the oil tankers and also ships carrying liquefied gas, right? That's what's happening right now. And if tomorrow it's possible, maybe the Strait of Hormuz will open up a little more as long as this doesn't keep happening. And here the suspicion is that there's an intelligence angle. I mean, it could even be Israeli. But it's because, let's say, that's the insinuation Qatar is making today, right? Who is the most interested in there not being an agreement? No, I mean, just saying there's something external there, right? Something that's moving and doesn't see a ceasefire as ideal. Well, a ceasefire, right? They don't want that. And above all, they don't want an agreement that would leave the Israelis in a bad position, right? So Israel is going to make its move. Now, let's say outside of the interest that the United States might have, they're going to be increasingly divided in that sense. That's why the conversation between Trump and Netanyahu caught people's attention. Do you remember this past weekend? And, well, there was nothing but frustration from Netanyahu, right? I'm still reading comments. He says, let's see, sorry. Let's check over here. Okay. My chat crashed. If you guys can see it. All right. Let's see if this one connects. There it is. It's loading now. Yeah, this is kind of weird. Greetings, Verderi. He says they don't want peace. That's what they don't want, says Verderi. Jose Sarte says that here in California, the cheapest gallon is still $6. Here we have 3 octane grades, 87, 89, and 91. Hey, the most expensive one. How much is it, Jose? I mean, how much is the most expensive gasoline? He says here in the Emirates. In the Emirates, we're off this week. I mean, this week. So you're taking it easy this week. Darwin. And, well, I'm sending you a big hello. Enjoy your week off, your chill week. And you're enjoying it over there, right? It must be amazing to be able to enjoy all the infrastructure that country has, right? Leonardo says, well, he says conflicts are needed to secure funding for the global arms industry, says Leonardo. How are you, Leonardo? Best regards. Great, Pandarita. See you in the next live stream soon. Pepe, all's good here. Thanks, Jose Sar. Hope things are good for you too. Well then, he says, Mami Maricia, right? Greetings. How have you been? Hello there. Thanks to the whole community. See you soon. Take care and have a great day. We'll talk again in the next live stream. Goodbye.